So here is Anita Raj of the AFCEA Technology Committee, who has put together our final session for the day, and she'll introduce it.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Anita Raj, and I actually serve on the Technology Committee for AFCEA, or the Mobility Technology Group. Well, I'm not serving on the AFCEA committee. I am the president of RR Technology, where we provide program management services on strategy and enterprise integration while creating value for our clients using our advanced roles and agile responsibilities. So today in this session on mobility, which I promise is going to be very interesting for you guys because we have some great clips, video clips, you will be hearing about the disruptive technology a few years ago, which was mobility, has now become a central part of our day-to-day lives and is allowing us, the private citizens, industry, government, and the defense and military to become smarter. However, there are enough new disruptive technologies like the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, social networks, virtual reality, big data, cloud, and robotics that are forcing newer innovations that is forcing the integration of these technologies to become more intelligent, and automation has become more real-time and at our fingertips for a very swift response, and is an upcoming trend in the C4i for mobility. From a decentralized solution to a more consolidated, cognitive, and integrated perspective on this future of mobility. So we have some specialists and experts here today whom I'm going to introduce you, and they will be speaking about how this technology is moving forward in the mobility space. So first up is Dr. Edward Chow from NASA JPL. When he is not busy managing and creating mobile agents, he spends his time relaxing with family on various cruises and has been to more than 40 countries, including the Arctic Circle and the Antarctica. Their family reunions often happen on cruise ships. Although Ed is based in LA, California, he can be seen more frequently in Washington, DC, almost like a local, and his wife is being visited by him only once in a while. I don't know whether that is good or not, but guess it depends upon how long he's been married. Thank you, Dr. Edward Chow, to join us. Next up is Jeffrey Schweitzer from Verizon. He has a super cool job of solving complex problems in unconventional ways. He has earned a reputation for succeeding with impossible missions. So nearly 15 years ago, while serving at the Pentagon, Jeff coined the phrase, redefining the art of the possible. He has continued to live by that words and built his post-military career in tech innovations. One of his team members, a former Navy SEAL, commented that if a love child could exist between MacGyver, Jack Bauer, and Q, it would be Jeff. So welcome, Jeff, and he will be giving us some insight into how important integrated mobility will be in the future of large-scale disaster response. Lastly, I would like to introduce Tom Suder from ATARC. When growing up as a child, Tom has been very much of a hybrid of a jock and a nerd, much like me. While in school, he played sports, growing up, but also played Dungeons and Dragons and was adept at programming computers. Now he has combined both his passion in the study of sports analytics. I really appreciate Tom for helping me in moderating today's discussions on the impact of disruptive technology on the integrated mobility of the future. Take it away, Tom. Enjoy.
Thank you so much for that introduction. It's always tough to succeed. Louis, you still here? Louis, I've known Louis a long time, and he actually could have served on this panel when he worked at Microsoft. I saw some of the first augmented reality demonstrations that I had seen. A couple of things that struck me about Louis's comments before we get into our panel. Whatley's Law, it's in mobility right now, alive and well. Don't worry about that. I want to poll the audience a little bit. Haven't done this in a while, so I'm kind of curious. How many of you have a smartphone? How many have 2 smartphones? How many of you have a government-furnished device? Okay. Does anybody have a BlackBerry? Okay, we got a couple out there. I was one of the last adopters as well. So the federal government has been moving ever so slowly to the world of smartphones, and I'll just kind of it's always going to be with the Department of Defense. We're always going to worry about security first. So a couple lessons before we get into looking into the future of where we are on the security of phones. Basically, the DoD is using iOS and Samsung. It's probably about 90% Apple, 10% Samsung, and that's pretty much it. I look at it, it's taken us about 6 or 7 years to get to this point. I kind of look at it as we pretty much have BlackBerries, the functionality that BlackBerries have, now we have it with these newer devices. And also BlackBerry is still alive and well. They have a percentage of the market as well. Recently, in October, John Zangardi, that was the deputy DoD CIO at the time, issued a memo on this new policy called the NIAP Protection Profile. It's basically an NSA NIST standard that when you're connecting a mobile app to a back-end system, that has to go this very rigorous process to be allowed to be on a government phone. So we're making a little bit of progress, at least on the mobile phone side, for security, but there's a lot of issues when we look at mobility beyond that in the IoT space. Recently, in the IoT space, there's been a lot of different kind of hacks. I know Germany has outlawed Wi-Fi connectivity inside of toy animals. They had a bear that was basically broadcasting a lot of the personal information from your house back to the company in China. There's a lot of commercial drones out there. One of the biggest ones was transmitting all of the geodata that was being collected by all these amateur folks using their drones, sending it back to China. The Washington Post in January, I think a lot of us saw this, U.S. soldiers revealing dangerous and sensitive information from their Fitbits. They're jogging around places that nobody knew that U.S. soldiers were, and you're basically running around the perimeter of the post, and that data is being published. I will say, while the government-furnished devices and the apps the securities come along there, we still have commercial apps that are broadcasting your GPS coordinates to China and Russia. You work at the Pentagon and you leave your personal phone out in the car, but you could have downloaded an app that has a calculator on it, something seemingly harmless, and if it's broadcasting your location coordinates, you kind of bind that with a couple different things. We had the OPM breach. I can see that this gentleman or young lady works at the Pentagon 5 days a week. I can maybe detect where they go socialize. There's a lot of ways that the average consumer doesn't really realize how they're being tracked with their mobile phones. So a lot of work to be done there, but the opportunities in mobility are tremendous. A lot of the federal government is very paper-based. I can't get access to the information when I'm out in the field. I know in the healthcare space, it's very much manual when you can have a tablet there to have access to all the patient information, doing surveys out in the field, folks on ships that want to, do maintenance reviews, those kinds of things, and also just intelligence gathering, just being out in the field. We're used to being in our skiff in the Pentagon. When I'm out in the field, I might need access to that information. I might not be able to access an analyst or something. So there's a lot of opportunities. I love what Louis said about OTAs. I think they directly apply to mobility. We're not getting these capabilities into the hands of the warfighters faster. We're talking basic capabilities. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for that. And I think what we're going to try to find out today is kind of peek around the corner on why we need to get ourselves level set where we're at least a little behind commercial, but not half a decade behind. And so these are some of the kind of cool capabilities that we're going to have our panelists. So we had the introductions already. I think we're going to start with Dr. Chow, and he's going to talk about the work he's doing over at JPL.
Right. Okay.
Great. You want to come up here? I'll just...
Okay. The presentation. Let's switch to the next. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the project that we're working with supporting Department of Homeland Security. This is not a DoD project, but it has a lot of similarity. If you think about warfighter in the battlefield versus first responder trying to respond to a unpredictable incident. So we're going to show you a video first of how DHS, Department of Homeland Security, imagine what the system will be in the future.
Confirm what appears to be a building explosion and fire at the intersection of Hughes and 3rd.
Roger, 734. Additional units and fire are en route. Fire will provide incident command. I'm patching your body cam feed to command now.
Roger, dispatch.
What do we have, Sarge?
Pretty much what the 911 caller reported. Looks like a building explosion.
Fire command is set up 1 block over. Williams and Moore over there.
Audrey, patch this call to Corporal Williams on his radio.
Copy that, Sergeant Parker. Patching you to Corporal Williams, located 2 blocks east on 3rd Avenue.
Williams.
Corporal, this is Sergeant Parker.
Go, Sarge.
You've got incident command setting up over there where you are. I need you to reroute traffic and keep onlookers way back so fire and EMS can get through.
Roger, already on it. Sarge, check your phone, we got an alert.
Audrey, give me incident command. Any path.
Linked to Incident Command.
Command, this is Sergeant Parker.
Battalion Chief Bender here, Sergeant. I see you're on the northwest corner. From your video, it looks like the building entrance is blocked with debris.
It's going to take some digging to get inside.
We're linked to the closed-circuit cameras in the building. We also have a drone up overhead showing 2 large hotspots on the top floor. But a witness says there are at least 2 people still in the building, so I'm sending a team to the 3rd Street entrance.
I've got 2 civilians here. Who's in trouble?
Fire Team 1, it looks like we have a mayday. Firefighter Thompson is down. Heart and breathing rate spiking.
We're on it, Chief. Got pinned by a chunk of ceiling. We're also bringing out 2 civilians. We put vital sensors on them. The EMS should be getting readings now.
EMS, do you copy the message from Fire Team 1?
Got it, Chief. I'm getting vital signs on 1 firefighter, 2 civilians.
Looks like we have 2 red tag patients with severe burns and trouble breathing, and a firefighter with possible crush injury. I need you to start the IV and get ready to intubate. Audrey. Connect me to the nearest trauma center.
Linking to St. Anthony's Trauma Center. 3.7 miles. Estimated travel time, 7 minutes.
This is Miriam Zhang. Go ahead, EMS.
I have 3 victims, 2 civilians, 1 firefighter. I don't have eyes on them yet, but I'm sending you telemetry.
Yes, I see the data. Definitely 2 red tags there. Do you have RSI medications ready and prepared to intubate if needed?
We do. As soon as we get them stabilized and we're on the way, I'll send more telemetry and detailed assessment information.
Okay, we'll be ready. Thanks for the heads up. I'll continue monitoring their vitals and transport.
Audrey, patch me to command.
This is command. Go EMS.
Chief, we have 2 victims in serious, maybe critical condition. I'm recommending a medevac.
Copy that. I'll alert aviation. There's a park 2 blocks east of here. Looks like the best landing site. I'll have law enforcement cordon it off.
I have the view from a camera on a building across the street. It looks under control.
I have a white SUV matching the description on 2 traffic cams headed east on 3rd past Tacony. I think I can pull the plate number from them.
Okay, great work. Let's datacast the route that vehicle's on to all patrol units, and when we get the plate number, let's send that out as well.
Good job, Sarge.
First responders today have nothing like the communications tools in this video, but we are making progress. Through its Next Generation First Responder program, the DHS Science and Technology Directorate is leading the effort to develop these capabilities and get them into the hands of responders in the next 5 years. It's important work that will help law enforcement, fire, and emergency medical personnel save lives, protect property, and enhance security in communities everywhere.
So we live in a world that's getting more and more complex. We have all kinds of sensor coming in. We have all kinds of situational awareness information coming in. It's becoming very, very difficult for first responder to be able to handle that information. So as I said, we have all kinds of different sensors. So basically what we are doing for the Department of Homeland Security, we're developing a technology called Audrey. It's an artificial intelligence agent technology that allows us to basically kind of put a guardian angel, for each first responder. Right? So basically, this Audrey agent that you're looking at, can look at all the body-worn information, the institute sensor, IoT, Internet of Things sensor, look at all the contextual related information. And then generate actionable intelligence to first responders. Right? The goal is to keep them safe, and healthy, and so on. So we are leveraging on many of the latest AI technology to develop this Audrey technology, but still, it's a very, very difficult problem. Right? Some of the difficulty is quite obvious. We very often, actually most of the time, the information that we observe is incomplete or sometimes is incorrect. Right? So how do we actually make decisions based on those information? And also how do we deal with the human interface to this AI system, and how does the AI system actually present the IoT information that's meaningful to human? And then on top of that, I think it's not just us. I think many people in DoD also have the same problem using some of the machine learning technology. When we don't have sufficient training data, then we do have a problem of having accurate results. Right? So if you look at the trying to go on YouTube and look for video of fire, inside the house, you won't find that many. Right? So basically, how do we actually collect useful information? How do we train this AI system? That's basically our problem. All right. So our architecture basically we're based on cognitive science and neuroscience, combine this together to develop this kind of AI system that allows us to kind of work similar to a human, be able to reasoning and learning at the same time, be able to work with incomplete data and so on. So that's basically, what we're developing. This system is called AUDRI. It stands for System for Understanding Data Through Reasoning, Extraction, and Synthesis. All right. We can use AUDRI, technology to support, both the mobile agents for first responder, as well as use it to do data analytic. All right. We're building the system. The previous speaker talked about lines of code, which I agree with completely. Actually, we're building a system that can use a lot of AI technology, but we're not talking about AI. We're really talking about data. We're really talking about how do we make the system be able to read, be able to learn, be able to think like a human. So it's not a matter of how many lines of code. It's actually the amount of knowledge, the amount of information that you have. That's really making the difference between a good versus a bad system. All right. So basically, we're building this AI agent. All right. To do that, we put this thing in on a mobile phone system. That we have agent on a mobile phone system, and each first responder basically carry their own mobile phone device. Right. And that particular mobile phone device actually talk to their own AI agent in the cloud. So if you look at, on the side, there's left-hand side, your left-hand side, there's a cloud agent. All right. That cloud agent actually pair with the particular first responders, a mobile agent. All right. And then that cloud agent also communicate with other agents, so they can collaborate, across different agents, they can collaborate. And then through this kind of interface, we can use standard protocol to talk to different kind of sensors. We use OGC SWE and the Sensor Sync API to be able to automatically discover sensors and to be able to automatically acquire sensor in a standard way. And then with that, then we can actually share sensor information. So even one firefighter is in one room, another firefighter is in another room, we'll be able to tell this firefighter what's happening in the other room. So they all collaborate together. All right. So basically, this type of system allows us to be able to manage complex communication, including like spectrum management, including communication resource management, and also IoT sensor, sensor interface management, all using, the AI software component, and then present the information to first responder, allow first responder to make decision. As I said, we interface all kinds of body-worn sensors, patches. We even interface to augmented reality devices. We're still doing a lot of experiments, trying out different type of AR, VR, or mixed reality type of system. All right. And then another thing is we're building the system so the system is flexible. Because we just we respond to different kind of situation. We simply do not know what kind of sensor is going to be there. We simply do not know what kind of instant response this could be. We're running 3 experiments now. We're doing a firefighter experiment. We're doing a experiment with chemical attack, and then we're also dealing with experiment with paramedics. Right? These are all very, very different kind of situations. So our system, we actually build our system based on an Android kind of plugin framework. So basically, our system, can automatically upload new code, to mobile device. So this is kind of pushing the intelligence all the way to the edge. So these edge devices will be able to make very smart decisions, do local data analytic, and so on. So this actually happened dynamically, within our system. Right? And then so even when we lose communication, the system will still be able to communicate across the different units. It still be able to use the local intelligence to make these decisions. We also build a whole backend system. This is a cloud-based backend system that allows us to be able to communicate. A messaging system allows us to be able to communicate and allows us to be able to store large amount of information. Actually, like I said earlier, it's not the line of code, it's actually the knowledge. Our goal is to be able to store many of these type of first responder knowledge so that these knowledge can be reused, right? We can actually transfer the learning, from different different system, right? So we're actually going to demonstrate some of that capability. So we're actually delivering, we have system running AWS. Actually, we're delivering to one of our customer in a couple of weeks for field experiment over the next 3 months. We store a lot of knowledge. We transfer natural, we automatically translate natural language, understand natural language. We put that into our standard format, and then we put that into our large graph database. We'll use that to share information, share knowledge across different first responder, and also use this to maintain large amount of information per first responder. Right? We fuse many of the social media information together. We're developing a lot of software that allow us to be able to automatically, for example, recognizing different kind of information from Twitter and be able to present information instantaneously. We actually store the whole procedure and knowledge, and we can actually do a very rudimentary type of automated workflow synthesis, so we can dynamically respond to different kind of conditions. Like I said, this system is customized per each user. So basically, we actually interview user for their preference, and then over time, we learn about the user preference. The overall system, you can see that basically it interfaces to a body-worn sensor, and also interface to all the mobile ad hoc network that DHS is building, interface to cloud system, and interface to all kinds of IoT devices. So this helped us to manage the complexity of interfacing to multiple different types of sensor, complexity of dealing with the network, which is very complex and dynamic changing condition, and also allow us to be able to share information using a cloud infrastructure. So this is basically end-to-end. The key is to be able to present information based on who you are, where you are, and what you're doing, and only don't bother you with lots of information, only give you information based on my understanding of you, and then present information to you only when you need that information. So that's basically what we're building right now. We're still building a lot of the code, maturing the system over the next year, 12 months. We're going to run 3 different experiments to demonstrate the capability.
Thank you, Dr. Chow. Appreciate it. Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Schweitzer. I'm Verizon's Chief Innovation Architect for the last 5 years, and now recently I've become the Asymmetric Solutions Architect, which is a fancy way of saying I solve complex problems with kind of less conventional approaches. So I want to talk a little bit about how I got to this point in my life. So in my past life career, I was a communications expert in the Army. I spent about 12 years in service before I broke my spine in Bosnia and was forced to kind of reinvent myself. But while I was there, I learned some pretty valuable lessons. So I had, at the time, I was intent on going into the special operations community because I had started to support military intelligence and SOCOM worlds in active missions. And I really enjoyed it. And I also enjoyed having the opportunities for latitude to explore things that didn't fall within traditional doctrine. The camaraderie and the teamwork that you would find in those communities lent itself to explore things where the risks were higher, the demands were quicker, the times to react could be shorter. And it really set the foundation for me when I suddenly found myself, having never been privately employed, having to figure out what are you going to do next. You got a wife and 2 kids and 2 dogs, and now you're crippled and you're supposed to go home to, back to the United States and do something. So I started out with a law enforcement organization down in Florida. And very quickly, I kind of missed my roots. So I found my way ultimately back to the Pentagon. That was back in 2005, in a role as the interoperability architect for the CIO of the Army. And I was probably 5 months on the job when Hurricane Katrina hit. So as a result, I was at the right place at the right time. I was given an opportunity to support General Honore, come up with some creative solutions that would allow us to connect 54 responding agencies together because, frankly, none of them could talk. And I tried to apply those lessons learned within the Pentagon, but because of bureaucracy, red tape, procurement challenges, et cetera, it just was apparent that it was impossible. And out of frustration, I went and found a new home where I could try to do this. So as I joined Verizon, I wanted to figure out how could I take these lessons learned and apply them into something that could be setting us up for success in the future. Because with the complexities that we've dealt with, we've actually created these problems ourselves. So if you think in terms of, the internet as an example, we built the internet to do something. It evolved over time. It does so many things more, but it creates problems along the way. Now, if we adhere to the rule books that we follow, of the way we build it and operate it, well, okay, we can just eat more of the problems that we have. But what if we threw those rule books out and challenged conventional thinking and tried to do something different? What outcomes could potentially be achieved? Well, I started working on that hypothesis to figure out what could I do, and it resulted in a solution that we call software-defined perimeter today. I came up with that idea during the hurricane response effort, and it took more than a decade of my life trying to figure out how to make it real. But last year was kind of unique for me because I had the opportunity to put it to test. Our company had just launched that product as a service the month preceding an event that I had created in Georgia as a mega disaster exercise. We had used this technology during that exercise as an experiment to see how we could connect and protect people in a simple, secure, and reliable way. And I've got a video that can kind of give you an example of what we did. We designed OCR 2017 to allow us to emulate a mega disaster. In a 3-hour period, we'll be exercising response to a tornado, to a chemical plant that has collapsed and exploded, to a subway that's been attacked by terrorists, our recreation of the flooding of the lower 9th Ward. And that's lastly followed by an attack on a convoy of vehicles.
Today is all about bringing lots of smaller organizations, clustering them in an environment, giving them a common problem and saying scale and solve that issue, but they need something to attach them together. That's what Verizon brings. We can connect all of these things.
We actually have a lot of moving pieces and parts. Aircraft that are flying all throughout doing various missions, robotic systems that are going where the space confinements don't permit people to get into, a variety of surveillance and visualization technologies around management of drones.
High-speed networks make everything possible.
These robots are now enabled with high-definition cameras, with artificial intelligence, and this is giving us a great way to actually take that risk away from your first responders.
When you come to a day like this and you see everything live and you see the effect that it can have on people's lives and safety and security, you take away a different emotional connection to what technology can do for you.
The best part of this entire exercise is getting federal, state, local first responders together, allowing them to understand what we can do before the real problems start is critical.
I'm sure you can imagine, especially those of you in industry, the looks on my leadership's faces when I said, this is what we're going to go do this year. This was a pretty big challenge. A couple of things this video doesn't tell you. One is that, as I was mentioning before, the lessons learned, the values of teamwork that I could borrow from my times in the service. This whole event, I planned this with literally 3 people in 8 weeks and no budget, and we went and executed it. Our biggest injury that we had on site was somebody that got a scratch on his leg, or actually on his forehead, when he walked into the back door of a truck that had the door open on it. Every excruciating detail had been gone over. And the power of 3 people, in the Army we had a phrase, the power of 1. The power of 3 was pretty impressive. But when you brought 195 people together and we put them into the middle of a mega disaster, not having any idea what to expect, those vendor partners that jumped in and said, I volunteer, I'll try, I'll contribute. In the context of what we were exploring, we created multiple miracles every single day here. It was pretty impressive. But it gave us insight into something else. It allowed us to think about what more could we do? Because by creating, my idea is that, we create better outcomes by working together. And we kind of showed that here. The other thing that this video didn't show is that it also served as a test bed for the capabilities of software-defined perimeter. One of my exercises that I was running in this event was I had a red team that was intent on attacking the applications I was using to manage the resources, which we had deployed in 3 public cloud environments, AWS, Azure, and Verizon's cloud. And this was the same environment that we had used for 4 preceding hackathons as we were testing software-defined perimeter. But on this particular day, our great marketing team started hitting the social media channels and letting the world know what we were doing. And it took about 4 hours, and I started getting a bombardment from the Russians. A little bit later, I had Chinese, and then finally in the afternoon, I even had cartels involved. We had 15 billion attacks that we successfully mitigated with 0 degradation on satellite, LTE, Wi-Fi, Li-Fi, tactical radio network, all the different systems that we had put in place to test what would happen. And my own red team didn't even get a chance to do anything except sit back and monitor. So when we understood what the potential of this was, we started to try to figure out what else could we do with this. Because this isn't a story about a network that's ultra secure or can provide a secure, compartmentalized, enclaved experience. It's about how do I take complex solutions, deliver them to the first responders and the individuals that need them in a very simple manner. Because that's the magic with this. In my group, we talk about ourselves as being knuckle draggers. So as a knuckle dragger, if I can just simply have a pair of gloves on and I can push 2 buttons, I launch a drone, it does its thing, it comes down, and it accomplished the mission, I think I've kind of succeeded. If you make things that simple, the solutions will actually get incorporated into people's workflow. The problem is the reality of making these things come to life is incredibly complicated, and it's further compounded every step we take. As Dr. Chow had kind of indicated, with the impact potential of artificial intelligence, hyperconverged networks, building and presenting things, information in the space-time role identity and persona-based context, it really is making it more and more difficult for us to succeed quickly in the short time frames that we need. So we used this event as kind of a springboard to figure out what could be done. What I didn't know was that 8 weeks later, our country would be hit with a series of disasters, 3 hurricanes, multiple wildfires, mass public shootings, all these things that required our infrastructure, our networks, our personnel to respond and able to support. So I ended up taking one of the teams down to the Florida Keys to figure out how could we apply some of the things that we had just been working to ideate around in the real world and see how it would benefit. And so this is an example of something that we created as a result of the lessons learned from these disasters. It's called Icarus. It's an internal name, but it stands for Incident Command Asymmetric Response and Unmanned Systems Platform. And although we have assets that deploy in the middle of a crisis every time a major one hits, they can only go so far. So we thought, well, what if we could go a little bit further, and leverage the developments in autonomous systems, for instance. Virtual reality, augmented or mixed realities. So Icarus was intended to allow us to take an approach of manned, unmanned, autonomous in land, sea, and air configurations that could allow us to deliver communications in places that you just simply couldn't get. And it gave us the insight to figure out then how could we start packaging these solutions in ways that would enable people to help themselves. Because one of the biggest takeaways from last year's disasters was communities, when they jumped in together, everybody wanted to help, but we just didn't know where to place things in the best or in the optimal places to be able to be leveraged. If you had a guy, for instance, from the Cajun Navy operating an airboat, and he's 3 blocks away from somebody that's needing a welfare check in their house because they stayed or they got surrounded by the water, who do you call first? A first responder that's trying to save somebody's life that happens to have a swiftwater rescue boat team that's trying to save someone, or do you task the commander of the Cajun Navy airboat? If you had that insight into each of these communities of interest and you could converge that all together in the middle of an incident and not open yourself up to adversarial attack from the cyber spectrum, you might actually have a real chance of being able to make a big difference. So we started taking some of these technologies, packaging them up in different ways, testing them between November and the Super Bowl, and we built this system, took it to the Super Bowl with us to kind of unveil it and start getting people to help work with us. Our enterprise customers, some government agencies, giving us that customer voice, the voice of the customer feedback into this, so that we can start to get ahead of where we need to be insofar as having the right solution at the right place and right time. And then ultimately, as Dr. Chow was indicating, the importance of all of this is also ensuring that we have the right subject matter experts, being able to connect into these worlds of information inundation, sort through that mess, and come up with the right answer exactly when we need it, and get that answer to the right people wherever they happen to be, on the common communications infrastructure that they may be using day in and day out. So for instance, during the storms, the image that you see here on the left, this is our 4D visualization environment. I was the only entity that actually had live streaming video in Puerto Rico after the storm went across and shut everything down. I was the first one that had video up and running there in the port. I had information from all over the rest of the country as each of the storms were impacting that let us look at the private sector and think of them in terms of a force multiplier. So this is starting to yield some real interesting outcomes here. Opportunities that if we do this right, we can build very sophisticated and intuitive and automated environments that help people respond better. And these tools can be self-sufficient because they can be used in our day in and day out practices of business. On the right, though, this is kind of setting the stage for those that come behind us. So one of the things that was kind of obvious to me when I was in the Pentagon was that there was a generation gap. We had the salty dogs leaving, and they're like, "I'm not taking any risk. I'm taking my knowledge and I'm packing it. I'm out of here." And then the young ones who weren't benefiting from a knowledge transfer. So there were a handful of people sprinkled in between, and they were trying to just keep everything afloat and make it work. The problem is, though, from the top to the bottom, people weren't connecting in the ways that they were learning. For instance, the millennials, their brains are wired differently. They think about problems differently. They may come up with a mental shortcuts that gets them to the same destination that we're trying to achieve, and it eliminates 4 or 5 steps or comes at it from a completely different angle. So part of the programs that I'm involved in are helping us try to understand what that looks like. And this rendering on the right is actually a screenshot out of our concept of a virtual incident command center. Think of it in terms like maybe a first-person shooter video game where you have an avatar and you assume that persona, and you go into the environment. It's really immersive. This happens to just be surrounding you with live streaming information that's kind of an all-source intelligence. It could be stitching together of multiple fusion centers, a smart city environment. It could be a drone that's providing data from the field. In this particular configuration, we've got a virtual sand table of a 3D model of a city where our event was held, so that you could see where all of your connected assets are and reach out, touch them, and then share that information with other subject matter experts that weren't even in region. And so lastly, on that thought, I just wanted to offer an opportunity to give you a means of potentially being involved. So those of you that are here from industry, if you have relevant technologies or services that you think might fit in an OCR type of an event, we're going to have another one this year. It'll be in November 5th through the 8th. And for those of you in government, if you'd like to explore the potential benefits of a public-private partnership, or just simply learn more about what's on the emerging horizon and see it in first person, you certainly would have the opportunity to attend. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. Wow. This is where we want to go. These 2 demonstrations show where we want to go. I just keep going back to Whatley's law. It seems like the pace of innovation is changing so fast, and we're still getting further and further behind in actually fielding some of these technologies that the private industry and research is coming out with. I think I'm going to ask, maybe, we don't have too much time, so I'm going to ask maybe 1 or 2 questions. I'd like to engage the audience. I think You guys love to get your input on this topic, but how do we get the speed of innovation adoption faster? We've talked about OTAs. We've talked about a lot of things. What in both of your experience, how do we get this faster? I mean, we built the Pentagon in 18 months in World War II before we had computers. How do we get this faster into the field?
Doctor, you'd like to take it?
Yeah.
Well, in our case, basically we have to work with the first responders. Right? We have to work with the end user because the technology is moving so fast. It's very difficult for the actual practitioner to know how to use these technologies. So we really have to engage them, show them what's possible. And then in our case, like I mentioned, we're running 3 separate experiments. In those experiments, we work with them very tightly on the use case and the benefit for them. And that's the only way to get them to accept it. Once they accept it within their community, then this thing will flourish as we hope.
And how does that work when you're getting inputs from them? It's kind of dynamic. How do you change, hey, we might need this new capability and how can we add it? Is it more of a dynamic thing? Or?
It's very use case driven. Like when we work with, we're working with Washington State, we have, weekly, telecom with them. And then we go through these use cases in detail. We map into functionality. And then if there's things that's not there, then we'll fill that in. But like I said earlier, the key is actually in the data, not in programming. So we try not to do programming as much as we can. We try to put the knowledge and put the process into the data so the system can adapt to it.
And so, Tom, from our side of the table, it's a little bit more complicated because as a global enterprise, we have practices that drive where we need to go. And those practices have to change over time. So this is a cultural shift and change within our own organization. To build better products, smarter, faster, cheaper, requires us to implement lean business agility, those types of philosophies into the mix. But it also means that we have to extend it out to the vendor partner suppliers that we work with and with the first responders, as you mentioned too, but also enterprise. So our customers have to have a seat at our table. So like this exercise here with OCR, it gave me a chance to try to discover things that you couldn't anticipate through analysis. So we're just taking a whole suite of approaches here to explore how we do this differently.
It's almost like you flipped like the government starting the innovation. You have to show them the innovation by doing these exercises. I mean, if this was a government-led exercise, it might be a procurement, it might take years to actually do it. Are you looking at things like that to help the government by partnering with them on something like this?
So as an example, building on this theme here, earlier on this year, right after the Super Bowl, we took our Icarus platform down to Texas on something we called Operation Southern Storm. And we wanted to explore what would these suite of technologies look like and how would they behave in an austere environment. And you can imagine the kinds of customers that might show up for this to explore it. We started just on the fly, testing different use cases and scenarios, throwing them out without anyone expecting them to be there. In November of this year, we're testing completely different types of scenarios. So the idea is to continually change to push the boundaries and explore what we wouldn't normally find.
And also you have to show them, for example, like in the 911 call system, it's actually, I actually sit in 911 call center with the operators. It's very, very difficult job. When people call in, they're panicked, they're nervous, they can't describe in logical way. So I don't know how many times they call in, we couldn't even figure out what's actually happening. So what we show them is we can actually use Twitter, use some of the social media information to tell them that when they call and say there's an explosion, this is actually a fire event that's causing the explosion. So that helped them to rapidly, so basically once you show them these kind of advantages and use case, they start to generate ideas.
And the fact that Dr. Chow just mentioned that scenario, it shows that we already have government agencies and private sector thinking in similar ways. So by teaming together, we already have a common basis for communication. I myself personally was just 3 weeks ago in a 911 call center and with an operator handling a call and asked her as this was unfolding, so you see what I'm showing you here with 4D visualization. What would this do in your workflow to make this experience different? And she's like, well, my God, if the officer here had that video coming off of his phone, I could turn, I could dispatch this call differently. So those are examples.
Great. Opening up to the audience. Yes, sir.
I have a question for Jeff.
Yes, sir.
Lynn Welsh here. The question is, how do you get ATO in your government network, given what you've demonstrated? You demonstrate 15 billion tax to work successfully. How do you then go to DISA or whoever and say, certify me, please? Give me authority to operate.
I'd have to answer that offline. That's a pretty complex topic. It's not easy. Is maybe the easiest way for me to describe it is not easy.
That's why these OTAs sound very, very attractive, at least as do a pilot to me.
Question in the back. Thanks for sticking around so long. It's been a great brief. I'm curious, how does this reach sort of the smaller rural communities that maybe don't have the budgets to afford these types of systems?
Well, for us, I mentioned that our system is actually a cloud-based system. So because we deal with, like potentially there will be 60,000 first responder organizations. Some of the organizations will be like New York City, New York, LA, that does, this huge organization. But there are also, kind of a couple person fire departments. So when we put our system in the cloud, then the only cost is a mobile phone, which many of them actually carry a mobile phone. They just download our app. So that's how you can actually get things out there.
And from the commercial side of things, it's a similar approach because your economies of scale occur when you provide it in an as-a-service model. And so that's the approach that we've taken.
One more question far back left.
Mic on? Mike? Is it on?
Yes.
There we go.
Sorry about that. I know that there's something was said in this presentation about another speaker about too many software codes. But what all is involved the process of minimizing the software codes, reducing them? What technology is involved? Which company is involved in that?
Great question.
Bringing down, reducing the number of software codes.
Well, so in our case, because we have to deal with the like I mentioned earlier, two-person fire department. So in our case, we use either open source software or government off-the-shelf software. So there's no cost in the software. And then in our case, we actually try to build our software as a very generic software, and then we use the data to change the content of the system. If you think about Audrey as a human starts with nothing. But it has the basic mechanism of learning. So basically, and when I try to talk about, we teach Audrey to read, to be able to learn, and then as we start to give it more data, the system started to build up and becoming smarter and smarter. So that is our goal. I'm not saying we're there yet. We build a lot of the software component for natural language understanding, image recognition, target recognition, and many of the reasoning aspects, including deep neural net and probabilistic, right? The different kind of combined technique together to allow us to kind of minimize, building additional software for each use case. And also in one of the chart, I talk about workflow. Workflow synthesis is actually a very important part of our system because in order to respond to different environment, you have to be able to generate new workflows. And the way to do that, well, like I mentioned, we only have rudimentary way of doing that, which is basically taking small workflow and assemble that together. And that's another way of reducing the software line of code, at least in our case. I'm not saying that's a general solution.
And I think, from my vantage point, I'm really trying to find ways to incentivize people to continue to innovate. Because if you look around the world that we're in, we have so much silicon out there that it's insane. If you could tap into it, what could you do with that differently? So, as we start to explore what those potentials are, I think you'll see people who are developing these types of programs rethink what it means. I'll give you just a quick example. Throw this out here. What if you could distribute your database across the entire infrastructure of microprocessors in a smart city environment? And at the same time of doing it, you're solving for your cyber risk component, you're fragmenting the data that's being used, and simultaneously, you're giving that city a potential revenue source to be able to provide compute and processing, leveraging all of these IoT devices on the fly. It would force people to develop applications that can be decentralized, that compute at the edge, that maybe even the network itself is an intrinsic component of that whole experience delivery process.
Any more questions out there?
Any questions? Final shot?
Last call?
Last call? All
It's
right.
5 o'clock somewhere. So I guess I'll ask one more question. Okay, we're going to be here in 5 years from now. You guys are on the cutting edge. You've been working in, we actually have functional things that are working right now. What are we going to be talking about? We're going to get you back in 5 years, 2023. What are the things that we're going to be thinking about then? We're going to have 5G, we're going to have bigger bandwidth, we're going to have more processing power. What are the types of things we're going to be thinking about?
For me, top of mind is going to be cognitive fingerprinting, the impact potential of cognitive fingerprinting in an artificially intelligent enabled world. Because if I can predict the way you think, and I can understand how you process information as a living human being, and I can map that to what you do in a cyber domain, I can predict outcomes before you achieve them. I can potentially identify things that are going to be impacting your life at a physiological level. If you're exposed to Ebola, or if you're suffering from PTSD, being able to use our digital networks to detect and head those types of things off is very much within the realm of probability.
Well, for our world, we're working on research, but we are really trying to make the augmented reality and virtual reality mix, right? And then so in our world, it's going to be very difficult to tell whether it's augmented virtual reality, and then we'll be able to use a lot of the technique to be able to do this type of intuitive type of environment, generated environment, where we can actually do a lot of things, without that thing actually being there. We can actually experience a complete different world, and that first responder will be able to save life even virtually without exposing them to dangers.
Great. Well, I'm getting the hook. So thank you. Thanks again to the panel.
Okay.
We appreciate it. Thank you.